Our lives are shaped by the movies. Well, mine has been anyway, and if you're on the channel watching this video, I doubt yours hasn't. It's amazing to read all of these different anecdotes across time of how we discovered film, how we fell in love with this incredible artistic medium. I've had conversations with people who saw Jaws, E.T., or Raiders of the Lost Ark in theaters during their original runs, and whose lives were never the same afterwards. Others have remarked on what it was like to experience the wonder of Jurassic Park on the big screen in 1993. My generation were just in time to be blown away by Minority Report, Catch Me If You Can, and War of the Worlds, and now a new generation of filmgoers are emerging who have been shaped by Lincoln, Bridge of Spies, Ready Player One, the BFG, and West Side Story. Well, okay, maybe not the BFG, but still, yes, there's a through line here. All of these films were brought to us across all of these decades by this guy. When it comes to the first eras of film history, the time of silent films all the way to the early days of New Hollywood in the 70s, there's a lot of room to debate who captivated the most minds over the longest period of time. The obvious answer is, probably Alfred Hitchcock, but, why can't it be Orson Welles, John Ford, or Powell and Pressburger? I think it's a thing that is very much open to interpretation, but in the entire half century since, I don't think there's any room for argument at the notion that no other filmmaker has birthed more filmmakers of his own, moved a larger audience, so thoroughly defined his years of cinema all through his work and his work alone, more than Steven Spielberg. I mean, he's the guy, right? If you ask 100 people to name one film director, I bet you he not only gets named by more people than anyone else, but he walks away with an outright majority. But people often forget, at one point, Steven Spielberg was one of us. He was a guy who just loved movies, who had a particular film, a particular shot even, that changed the very foundations of who he was. Or unlocked it, because it was likely there the whole time. It just needed a little push. If you've ever loved even just one single moment from one of his films, understand that you were gifted that because Spielberg loves movies for the exact same reason that you do. The cynical can look at his absolute annihilation of the box office, a reign of supremacy that dwarfs any other director's career, and think that it's all about the dollar signs for him. Or even more cynical can look at his post-70s output as being fine, or work that infantilizes the audience. But no matter how good or bad one thinks any individual film of his is, no matter what ups and downs and best and worst eras his career has had, I don't think he's made a single film out of anything less than sheer adoration for what movies can do, what movies mean to people. Yes, that's right, even 1941 screams out to me from the screen a complete love of cinema on Spielberg's part. And now, from the deepest wells of his heart, Spielberg brings us The Fabelmans, his semi-autobiographical ode to this thing that he so dearly adores, set in two worlds: the world of discovery he grew up in, cinematic discovery in particular, where he realized that this was what he would love for the rest of his life, where, just like his parents, the technical were paired with the emotional and creative to create these awe-inspiring series of images, visuals of pure imagination. But he's also living in the world of the tumultuous domestic dynamic he grew up in, an affair and later divorce, which often informed the text that would have life breathed into it by the other world. It's probably easy to say this about a filmmaker's personal statement film a la The Fabelmans, but this is genuinely Spielberg's firmest statement on what movies mean to him, what being an artist means to him, and why art matters. And I don't think it's as cut and dry as if, Hitchcock made a movie about how he became a filmmaker. Because beyond the cinematic spectacle itself present in so much of Spielberg's work, I think nearly all of his films, Schindler's List and Saving Private Ryan being perhaps the only exceptions, practically scream, "I love making movies" at you in a way no other filmmaker does. I don't disagree that Spielberg is sentimental. In fact, I'd argue that that's probably his strongest attribute. It's why we're endeared to him as a storyteller. And I also think that people misunderstand what he's often being sentimental about. So to see the ways in which the Fabelmans assert this notion more than any other Spielberg film is a goddamn powerful thing. The film does, of course, begin with Spielberg's XP, Sammy, as a boy 6 years old and going to see the greatest show on Earth, and where it might have been the bikes launching into the air in E.T. or the first time the T-Rex roared in Jurassic Park that did it for one of us, for Sammy, it's the way a train propels a car through the air that absolutely captures his mind, where his only way of venting the dose of childhood adrenaline this image has overdosed him on is to ask for a model train set for Hanukkah and then crash it just like how he saw in the movie. And it's when his mother has him film it with a camera so that he only has to crash it once that the true seed is planted. He can make his own movies and capture all the things that have been unleashed by his imagination. The spectacle is apparent early on, the earnest desire to create, the impatient need to put everything out there, captured most poignantly in the intimate moment where Sammy uses his hands as a projector screen just so he can immediately see what he's captured. It's a pure portrait of childhood joy, of the spark, and it's one of the most human segments in any of Spielberg's films. That humanity carries through in how Sammy's filmmaking abilities develop through his adolescence. I don't think Spielberg gets enough credit for how he can say a million words about a character with a camera movement. Every Frame of Painting's now well-known video on the Spielberg Wonder illustrates this beautifully, but I also find that he has a natural ability to find the truth of a scene as he works. There's a scene where Sammy uncovers the affair his mother is having practically by accident as he's filming everyone in the family on a camping trip, panning past his sisters, and the smoking gun occurs in the background. So much so that he doesn't even notice what he's filmed until afterwards, when he's editing together a home movie for his parents. On the one hand, this is Spielberg paying tribute to Antonioni and also his peer Brian De Palma, especially if you look at Blow Up and Blow Out. But it also feels like he's kind of acknowledging his own strengths as a filmmaker. And while I usually discourage biographical and certainly autobiographical films from being fluffy about their subject, I simultaneously think that if we're going to call on such movies to be honest, to impeach them for brushing over the lesser pillars of one's character, then those films should be equally honest about the things that said person is good at, the things that make them worthy of a biopic in the first place. And the reality atop that too is that this is a film about a boy. This isn't Spielberg chronicling his rise and success as a budding filmmaker already in industry. For some reason, people are really disappointed that this movie wasn't that it didn't take that route, which makes no sense. Why, just go read a Wikipedia article. It's really that simple. This is about the life, the loves, the family, the emotions, the turbulence, the people who shaped his creativity, the reason he creates and continues to create art, and why he's so good at it. It's an emotional masterclass that uncovers the soul present in the works of one of our great artists. The Fabelmans is the rare biopic that captures the spirit of its subject so that you understand the lens through which they see the world and the mind behind the camera more than you did entering the theater. I understand how he came to be the filmmaker that I and so many of us got swept up in, but I also feel like I better understand the Spielberg who is in his 70s, the one who lived not only this era of his life, but has also lived several since. What really fascinates me about The Fabelmans is the particular way Spielberg rewards fans of his previous work. There are visual nods all over the place, most likely unintentional, since the director has spoken many times about the memories and vignettes he draws upon every time he makes a movie. His childhood western betrays Raiders of the Lost Ark 20 years before he made it. His World War II film afterwards foretells the technical mastery of Saving Private Ryan, almost double that amount of time before he made it. The death of his grandmother and the effect the moment of her passing specifically had on him clearly informs the section of E.T. where E.T. is hospitalized, and so many other examples. But he enriches some of his earliest films, his 70s work particularly, as well. Now, obviously, you can watch The Fabelmans and then go see his film from, say, Duel through Raiders for the first time in your life, and the extra context will be there. but I think it helps if you've seen those films at least once before, not only because you'll probably pick up on those things during the Fabelmans, but because you'll have the luxury of having watched those classics both without this information and after having received it. You'll have seen the film with one set of eyes first, and then with another set the second time. And I know for me, I walked away appreciating so many of his past films even more than I already did, because I saw the moments of Spielberg's life that led to the creation of some of the best films of all time. The guerrilla filmmaking of Duel is fascinating and even impressive on its own, a statement on what can be accomplished with a low budget. But having the Fabelmans as a resource, seeing Sammy develop the things that he was able to develop with no money and only his own friends and family members, makes you wonder if that's just the style of filmmaking that Spielberg was passionate about, and that it was the obligations of repeatedly shooting for the big studios that began after Duel made Spielberg a big name that caused it to quickly be drummed out of him during Sugarland Express, and even by Jaws, had been replaced with a much more locked down, formal, even elegant hand. You wonder how Raiders would have turned out had his career not blown up in the 70s and he was forced to shoot Indy on the same terms with which he shot Duel. You look at the Sugarland Express and you see a dysfunctional, violent couple. You watch it after the Fabelmans and suddenly you wonder if the violence is a personification of his parents' divorce. You watch Jaws before this and you see a dark tale of a man obsessed with ending the threat posed to a town by a shark. You go in post the Fabelmans and you think of Sammy's conversation with his uncle about how family art will tear you in two. You think about how Chief Brody got the shark, but also earned the scorn of his town, created friction within his family, and almost paid with his life, and you wonder, is Brody and the shark an allegory for Spielberg and how badly he wants to make movies? Is the moment Brody takes the shark down the moment Spielberg finished Duel? Is our art an obsession? Is it a dangerous one? Is it too much? Can you marry your experience, your truth, your family with your vocation as an artist? A lot of questions here, but that's kind of part of the process. The biggest mistake young aspiring artists make, and we even see Sammy make this mistake in the film, is safety. Their fatal flaw is to think they can skirt by without risking anything, without bearing their soul on screen. But the truth is, you risk everything with art. Making something safe does nothing to mitigate that risk, so why hold back? Why not go all in after the shark if it's going to try and bite you regardless of what you do? The film that I think is most enhanced by the Fabelmans is arguably the first film where Spielberg's heart for sheer spectacle first bore fruit, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. When I see Sammy crash the model train as a child, I see every last strand of the metamorphosis, of the roots that grew and grew until they became the spaceship that took Richard Dreyfuss. In seeing the breakup of his parents' relationship, the affair, his mother's departure, I see why he has Richard Dreyfuss leave with the aliens at the end. The ending to Close Encounters has always confused me a bit. I've always understood it, but it's always felt a bit cold, and I think now I see the warmth in that scene. I understand the melancholy of it all much more than I ever have. I no longer see an absentee husband in Richard Dreyfuss's character. I see a filmmaker coming to understand his parents as people. And what Dreyfuss was doing in the film was what he always did, which was following his heart. His father had that logical, obsessive, scientific engineering brain, which we see in the Fabelmans, and which made him one of the best in his field. Something clearly Steven took to, but sometimes it made him a bit of a distant father and husband. The reality is, he was pursuing the thing that drove him, not too dissimilar from Steven and his creative mother, who not only fawned Spielberg's creative flame, but sacrificed her life as a musician and being with the person she loved for so long until she had to leave. She had to follow her heart. Spielberg's less judgmental on the decisions people make in service of their own desires because we only have one life. As Michelle Williams says in the film, you do what your heart says to because you don't owe anyone your life. In Close Encounters, I see truth. The kind of brutally honest truth we know as kids we often speak as kids, but stumble with in adolescence and into adulthood. The Fabelmans unearths the need for Spielberg to make movies. On top of being enamored by the spectacle of it all, it offers him a sense of control when everything in his life is out of his control. The divorce, the moves, the affair, his father's disapproval of his path, bullying, girlfriend. When the lights go down and the projector begins to whir for however long the picture is, Spielberg has us in the palm of his hands. He feels what he wants us to and sees people as they truly are, their secrets, their insecurities. When Sammy or Steven point a camera in your direction, you're exposed because those little details, the parts of life that we notice but often go overlooked in cinema, are the parts that make his movies soar. It's what moves people. He points the camera, moves the camera with such fluidity, such direction and intimacy, so as not to lose the humanity of it all, regardless of how complex the scene is. And then he stitches it all together. At first cutting out the pain, the uglier parts, only to realize that lingering, being honest, and bearing your soul for an audience, while it's painful, is what makes art, his art, as powerful as it is. Creating is the most difficult thing a person can do, and not everyone can do it. It takes sacrifice. People will judge you, try to deter you, call it a hobby or child's play, call you selfish for leaving your family and friends, everyone you know and love, to put you and your artistic quest first. And when you're alone, drawing upon your pain, emotions, experiences, memories to fuel your art, it'll cut deeper than ever before. But the end result will be the most beautiful, moving thing you've ever made, and it's this emotional catharsis that's all within control of the artist, which is then transferred to an audience. That's incredible, man. There is nothing like that in the entire world, and Spielberg's been doing that his whole life. It's why his films are so honest and sincere. Yeah, they're filled with awe and splendor. They take us to new worlds, give us great characters, but at the core, what allows them to resonate with an audience is the human element, the Spielberg experience that so many of us relate to. What the Fabelmans did for me is I didn't just come out of the auditorium with a deeper understanding of Spielberg's work. Even to say my deeper understanding of Steven Spielberg himself is what I came away with pales as a descriptor to the truth. The truth is, the Fabelmans reminded me why I do this, why I love movies. Hell, man, even beyond that, why I love art. For as long as I can remember, I have believed in the power of cinema, and Steven Spielberg is one of the filmmakers most responsible for instilling and reaffirming that belief in me. And so, for all the reasons that The Fabelmans is great, for all of the ways it reassures me of my belief in cinema, its greatest asset is how it serves as proof, more than any of his other 21st century works, that Steven Spielberg has never stopped believing in cinema either.